the Golden Age. Sutton Hoo, oh, where's that thing gone? Is down here, marked on the map there. The prior burials we'll be looking at in passing as well is Prittlewell, I say prior, that's a post one, Taplow in particular, and of course the Staffordshire Hoard. So these are the archaeologically very, very interesting and rich sites, as I hope you shall see, form a clear pattern. Staffordshire Hoard, it just accelerates the whole perspective by giving us such a huge quantity of stuff of a similar kind, particularly the astonishing skills with gold and garnet that you shall see. And this is our main documentary source, written right up north of the post-industrial wasteland of South Shields. There used to be a visitor centre up there called Bede's World, which I don't think is in business anymore. But a wealth of material. That's a lovely picture of Bede as he loved to be seen writing as a scholar. Scholarship, literacy, the early church, it all goes together. From a 12th century Durham manuscript of his main PhD thesis was on the calendar, De Temporum Ratione Liber. We talk about his ecclesiastical history as our main source, which was really just a bit of what they now call a potboiler for him. But it became a very formative text and continues to be today. And has set an agenda in many ways that the archaeology rather delightfully subverts and shows us that there's so much more to the world than Bede gives us. Great man nevertheless. And then so these burials down here, so focusing in on southeastern Britain. Some of you may have seen an earlier version of this map. I've just simplified it a bit. So Taplow, a very impressive barrow overlooking the Thames over just to the east of Maidenhead. That was the first of the pattern that shows a rich burial characterized by beautiful gold filigree work and garnet inlay, as you see beautifully in this buckle, other fittings as well, plus feasting equipment, which always seems to include these kinds of instruments that they called harps. We now call them lyres, the Germanic round-headed lyre to be specific. And that's a nice graphic of that. We'll have more detail on that if we get time. Prittlewell, similarly, that barrow is now restored. That's rather a good thing. I'm all for the restoration of flattened barrows, characterised by beautiful feasting equipment. Certainly got a gold buckle, but interestingly rather plain compared with that. And another of one of these beautiful lyres. And this one's very interesting as it was demonstrably the property of the person, the prince or king, buried there. But all of them are put in the shade by the immense wealth we see at Sutton Hoo, with gold and garnet inlays and a very fine lyre indeed. And I've got a replica of that, which I will hope to be able to find time to strum for you later. And the most beautiful buckle of all. Sutton Hoo's got everything. Everything's bigger, richer, more of it than any of these other burials. But they're all part of the same pattern, I hope you can see. And that includes the rather sadly damaged site at Snape, almost completely flattened by the main road that drives through the heart of the site. And it had all been burgled long before, but the burglars missed this beautiful gold ring. That's a very special ring indeed, enough to include this in the pattern. And you can just see a little hint of the surviving barrow on the south side of the road there, which I got early one morning last year. And so these barrows in East Anglia, we've got actually a lot of barrows in the landscape, and but only this is the very useful map from the publication Barrows of East Anglia, published back in 1981, and I think we can increase the number of barrows that are known to have existed now, but the basic pattern I think will not have changed very much, and a huge sort of galaxy of them on the Colnese Peninsula, between the Orwell and the Deben, and further south onto Shotley, and indeed across into northeast Essex, Tendring Country, lots of barrows along there and along the Store Valley. But of all these, and we counted them up, there's something like 8,000 in all of East Anglia. Only 2 are ship burials, one at Sutton Hoo, sorry, 2 at Sutton Hoo. Where are we on this map? There. And one at Snape with 2 little boat burials to go with it. And that's quite an impressive pattern within the overall distribution of barrows. There's something about this corner of Suffolk that they go in for ship and boat burials in a big way. And again, it's Sutton who has got the biggest of the lot at 90 feet. The Snape one, I think, was calculated to have been about 70 feet. And you know, Sutton, this is, those of you who know, it's a long way above the river. In fact, this is a plan from old Rupert Bruce Mitford's report before they went metric, showing the old contours in feet. I think you get more contours for your money here. It certainly gives you a clear idea of the steepness of the valley side here, and barrows sitting right on the edge at the top here. And I've suggested a possible way in which they may have been able to get the ship up there. And we've had some interesting work on the ship, especially in the light of the new plan project going well ahead now to build a full-size replica of the Great Sutton Hoo ship, estimated to have been at least 5 or 6 tons when light. You know, that's a major job to portage a ship right up that steep hill. And this shallower valley is the likelier one they would have taken. And I think there are plans to open that up, but they've always got plans, haven't they? And so you should have a copy of this map with the more detailed layout of what we know so far. That's based on Martin Carver's plan following the great work of dear old Rupert Bruce Mitford. And you see it's quite a mixture there. One ship burial proper with a great burial chamber amidships, as we see in the more famous, in many ways more famous. They seem to be more well known, the ship burials from the Viking Age in Oslo Fjord in Norway. Mound 2 though, let's not forget that. That's really unusual because it's there's a ship there, but the ship appears to be over the top of the burial chamber. There's only one other I know like that, and that's in Schleswig, just outside the old town of Hedeby. And that variation in style has never really been explained. But I think it still brings with it the very powerful notion of the use of a ship in a burial implies that death is but a point of embarkation in a journey. And this is actually a very widely found theme throughout many cultures, a way in which ordinary folk would come to terms with the end of life, but provide a narrative that ordinary folk would understand, that we cross a river to the other side after death. And it's certainly a way for, I say, ordinary folk who haven't got degrees in theology to readily be able to come to terms with that. So besides the ship burials, you can see we've got other types of burials there. Mound 3 is also very odd. I sometimes wonder if cremation in a dugout, oak dugout, is that an early, like some of the Snape, little ship boats at Snape were dugouts, little dugout canoes, a very traditional and effective way of building a small vessel. So we might need to add that to the list as well. Anyway, you can have great fun with Google Earth flying around the site. And I've got a nice angle there. You can see the way the site overlooks the river and clearly deliberately intended to be seen from the river, as indeed Rosebery and Cliff have demonstrated with a picture up from their boat on the river, looking up the hill, and clearly stands out the restored Mound 2, which is the only barrow restored to its estimated original proportions, which I wish they had done more barrows like that. It's still, though, much of the site from the river obscured by this 19th century little top hat wood, which I've heard described as a 19th century job creation program. So you've got to imagine in the 7th century, big tall barrows that would be much more widely visible. They would not be obscured by the great wood that sits there now. And so that's quite a good view. And also I'm very pleased that the little ring mowed by dear old Les, who's unfortunately now retired, that marks Mound 14, which is clearly a very important barrow on the site, as it's a female inhumation. Unfortunately robbed, but nevertheless, as usual, the burglars misfits, we can see it was a very interesting burial indeed. But the best overall view of the whole site remains that taken by Cliff and John Griffiths the Elder, I call him, to avoid confusion with younger Griffiths, 29th November 1983. You can just see the wing support there. It looks like it was Cessna or something, I think it was. And that's, so 1983, before the major program excavations that began in the late 80s. And it really does see, you can see things that are they're not nearly so sharply defined anymore, like the old lane that goes right through the heart of the site, linking up to the track down to Ferry Cliff beyond. Ooh, what's that one? And you can see how Mound 2, as it used to look before it was restored, all weathered and slumped down and filling up its surrounding quarry ditch. The quarry ditch that forms the mound, and that's basically how you build a mound. You dig a round ditch and put spoil all in the middle, but very, very weathered. Also a huge dent in the middle, which was almost certainly the remains of a burglary hole. I can remember we talked about this. Several mounds have these little dokes in the middle, and we all confidently wondered if they were collapsed burial chambers. Unfortunately, they all turn out to be remains of burglary holes. And when I talk about the dream ship, I mean that in more ways. A dream ship in the sense of crossing the boundary between worlds, but also in many ways Sutton Hoo really is a dream come true. It's discovery, thanks to the dreams and inspirations of this remarkable lady, Edith Pretty. Edith May Pretty, there standing outside the French doors at Tranmere House, as it's now called, was her house in the 1930s, looking towards the barrow there. And it was she who was inspired by her dreams and by there's undoubtedly a spiritualist congregational inspiration factor there as well, between her and a friend of hers. And this was the barrow that she had the dreams about, the story of a dream of a warrior in shining armour standing on it one day. And so she wrote to Ipswich Museum, which in those days employed archaeologists and was run by scholars. And there is the great Suffolk archaeologist, Basil Brown, who she directly employed to excavate her mounds. I don't think you can quite do it that way anymore. You've got to plough through all the bureaucracy of everything. And it's Basil's great skill that we shall perennially recall and salute. First of all, he refused to start on that mound because it was very, very large and much disturbed at the western end. And you can just see there, that line of a bank is the old field bound, a medieval bank and ditch field boundary, presumably to keep the sheep from straying off down the hill. And that had actually effectively destroyed the western end of the barrow, thus obscuring true centre, which is why later attempted burglaries failed to locate the treasure buried in the true centre, because the true centre was obscured, which is a great stroke of fortune for us. You think how random are all the factors about whether or not archaeology is preserved at all, let alone discovered. So how fortunate we are that that accident occurred and that Mrs. Pretty was there in the 1930s with her dreams and could afford to employ Basil. It must have been quite a moment with Mrs. Pretty, with all her authority and class and money, and Basil refusing to start on that one. He wanted to start on some smaller ones to get his eye in. Well, he may have heard the expression, "You can't hurry me, I'm from Suffolk." And that Basil, I think, a true Suffolk country gentleman, stuck to his guns. So starting on smaller barrows, these were both burgled but clearly Anglo-Saxon burials. Mound 3, I've just mentioned, very curiously cremation on an oak tray with some very interesting pieces the burglars had missed. Mound 4, apparently female, with dog and horse, all cremated on a bronze bowl wrapped in textile. And actually, we've had a repeat of that pattern in, I think, 6 and 7. And a fragment of the ear bone of the horse that the pathologist's report suggested the horse may have been deaf in one ear, which is a funny detail I always remember. And then Mound 2, starting in with the rising sun behind, trenching on the eastern end, and soon came across very distinctive rusted ship's rivets, a very distinctive kind of diamond-shaped wash as roves, and they were able to suggest, therefore, a boat burial, or at least a ship burial even, immediately. and Mrs. Pretty's chauffeur drove Basil over to Old Moot Hall Museum, where they had some of the rivets from the Snape ship burial, excavated in 1863, and very closely comparable they were too. And so this was very exciting, but everything very scattered and disturbed and thoroughly burgled. Basil did the best he could. He only had the help of Mrs. Pretty's gardener and farm manager. And a big barrow with just 3 men, it was a huge, but they did the best they could with those limited resources. Since then, Professor Carver, with his enforced labour of undergraduates, was able to excavate the whole thing and hence restore it back onto its original base and show that actually the ship had been bigger and had been located over the burial chamber. But nevertheless, that's not to detract at all from Basil's achievements at the time. And so come the following year, 1939, Basil is finally ready to excavate the one she's had the dreams about all along. So as you can see on this picture, dawn 6th of March 2009, the sun rising in the east. You can see the sun is already burning off the frost that's still coating the rest of the barrow. So with the sun behind him, which is exactly what you want, you've got the light shining where you want it, starting in on the east and then trenching in, and very, very quickly came across distinctive ship's rivets again. But unlike Mound 2, this time they're all in very neat rows. And this is the famous, probably the best picture showing the full extent of the great ship that Basil uncovered with such immense skill. It's such a fragile thing. It's just a ghost of a ship preserved by the rusting of its rivets, which are held in place by all the sand that it sits in and that has been used to backfill most of the hull, just with a central burial chamber marked by that rectangular area at the bottom of Basil's ladder, which had all collapsed and sandwiched into the bilges of the ship, of course, long before. But the great thing is, because that wasn't the true centre of the barrow as it stood, attempted burglars had missed it, and effectively it was undisturbed, which is a fantastic thing. And the wonders that Basil is able to uncover, and the team that came in eventually, of course, there had to be some Society of Antiquaries and various leading academic archaeologists of the day had to come in. Astonishing wonders, technical and artistic wonders that are still astonishing and still leave lots of unanswered questions. And the temptation is to plunge straight in and look at them, but I just want to say briefly something about the ship itself, because for a start, you're looking at a beautiful shape, a kind of a long leaf-shaped vessel. It's 89 feet as it sits in the ground, and it seems that the barrow would have covered the bow and stem. Actually, not impossible that the bow and the stern would have stuck out either end of the barrow. That seems to be the case in Mound 2, for example, and there are a kind of great grave marker. And so we're talking about a vessel that's the best part of 100 feet long, and as to its structure, there really is no serious doubt that it was a serious sea-going vessel. This was being beautifully demonstrated by the building of a half-length replica in the early 90s, and that's Cliff's excellent picture of it just downriver, cruising down the estuary past, that's Ramsholt in the background. In fact, I think that's Robert Simper's house. And seafarers amongst you will note that the square sail, the wind is on the beam, and yet she's making very, very good headway there. And the full-size one is going to be so exciting. Edwin, who's at the stern there and really is the great initiator of this great half-length replica project, that we together decided to call it the Sawulving. That is the cub of the sea she-wolf would be the full translation of that name. And there's a lot of his building, his expert as a boat builder over the years that's gone into it. And yeah, the wind on the beam, that's all estimated size, but I think it works very well and has led to the great project that's going ahead, the Riverside project, Riverside Trust in Woodbridge, to build that full-size one. And if you want to take part in that, you can buy a rivet as a contribution, or 2 rivets even, to that. And so, yes, a great ship. And there can be no doubt that it was an old ship when buried, as we could tell from the lines of rivets that clearly showed more than one place where it had been repaired. And what a great way to end a great rule in a great ship burial. There have been echoes of this over the years in many ways, not least the burial of Sir Winston Churchill, the great funeral rite of which was prolonged over a couple of days and involved a stage of taking the coffin down the Thames, and a very moving sight, especially with the great old cranes of London docks, as then was, bowing in honour as the boat bearing the coffin sailed past. It was a very moving moment indeed. But as I said before, the idea of using a ship as a funeral vessel, it brings with it this very simple but powerful notion that death is but a point of embarkation in a journey across water. And this has got to be one of the most glorious examples. I've mentioned the ones in Oslo Fjord. We'll have a glimpse of them if we get time later. They are 9th century. The famous Gokstad is not as big. Oseberg, similarly. Gokstad, certainly an ocean-going vessel, as several replicas have demonstrated. And I hope the replica of this, when it's completed, the Riverside Trust will demonstrate its seagoing prowess as well. But this is not only, what I'm saying is it's the biggest of the lot and the richest of the lot. The Oseberg and Gokstad ones have both been burgled soon after, well, not exactly soon, but certainly not long after the burial. And but this whole notion, of course, is there are different ways in which it is signalled in burials, and it goes a long way back in human culture indeed. The first recorded instance that there's probably ancient Mesopotamian ones, but certainly ancient Egypt has a very graphic and clear example of it in the text known as the Egyptian Book of the Dead, where we have a clear reference to the voyage conducted by the ferryman, he who looks back, as rather beautifully illustrated here in the papyrus. And this in turn almost certainly lies behind the more familiar classical myth of the ferryman Charon, the Greek mythology, the dead taken across the river Styx by the ferryman. And hence the archaeologically widely attested tradition of burying the dead with a coin, usually in their mouth, which is very widespread indeed. And we have, interestingly, a couple of coins, I think they're held in the hands of the Prittlewell burial, which may be an allusion to it as well. So different ways in which this great metaphor is referred to in the burials and can be evidenced, therefore, quite clearly archaeologically. And also a tradition that carries on through to Roman mythology, as we see, for example, in the Mildenhall treasure, particularly in the great silver dish. This is an absolutely awesome treasure, it really is. There it is, that's nearly 2 feet in diameter. And what have we got? 8.25 kilograms of silver, and absolutely artistically beautiful beyond all. It's right up there with the great treasures of classical antiquity. But it's the central panel that's of great interest, because the central figure round which they're all dancing, this seems to be, has been interpreted as the dance in paradise, around this great nautical figure who's that's Neptune, or Oceanus as he comes to be known. You can see quite clearly, if I zoom in there, there he is. He's got a beard, wave-like beard, a beard with dolphins swimming in it and in his hair, and surrounded by these sea nymphs, nereids, and as the official British Museum report on this declares, by Keith Painter, Oceanus recalls the islands of the blessed. The nereids riding over the waves on sea beasts could represent here the journey of souls across the ocean to the afterlife. And the Bacchic revel rite, the great party going on in the outer section, could be an allegory of souls in bliss in paradise. That sounds nice, doesn't it? So this is all background stuff, really, but you've got the idea of the Bacchic revel rite, the great feasting, is very much something that we can bring to life here at Sutton, who, because of the great wealth of feasting equipment that's buried with the king. William Thomas Sankey pointed out long ago that even if we didn't have all this wonderful regalia of warriorship and gold and garnet, the immensely rich collection of feasting equipment would certainly signal the kingship of the person buried here. And I think that's a very good point. I say person buried here, as I've suggested here, Barrow 1 or Mound 1, I sometimes think should be renamed Radwaldaslow, Radwald's Barrow, for reasons I shall come to. How are we doing there? Good. That just gives me time to amplify a bit more of this background here before we plunge into the depths of the ship after the break, or maybe even before if we get time. The background I've looked at is a fairly deep background, and we're going back to ancient Egypt, but there's actually a text very, very much closer to the culture of Sutton Hoo and the Woffings of the 7th century in Old English. And it clearly demonstrates that this idea of the barrow, the ship in the barrow, as a metaphor for this great point of this great ferry journey across to the haven of heaven over the horizon, we find that a wonderful account of a ship burial, or rather a ship funeral, a royal ship funeral, in the Old English epic of Beowulf, which is this great poem that is preserved rather miraculously in a late 10th century copy, now housed in a great collection of manuscripts, a codex in other words, in the British Library, part of the great collection of Sir Robert Cotton. And there it is, and that's, you can see page 1 there, that opens straight away. Its opening movement is all about the origin of this great northern family who come to be later descendants, rule the Danes and their descendants. And when you look at the language and you transcribe it, as I've done here, it all falls out into neat lines of alliterative poetry. So that's the manuscript, calfskin vellum. Unfortunately, it's all a bit singed and damaged because it all got caught in a library fire in 1731. And you transcribe it and the lines fall out like that, and you've got obviously some interesting and unusual, at least unusual to modern eyes, letters, but then you lay it out and it all falls out to neat alliterative verse. That is verse which works along the poetic principle of each line. It consists of 2 half lines which are bound together by the alliteration of the principal syllables. And so that's how it works out. And I'll just give you a literal interlinear translation. It tells us straight about the glory of the spear-wielding Danes in days of yore, and reminds us, clearly the audience knew the legend much better than we do, but we can retrieve it, of their founding father, whose name basically means the shield of the sheaf. That's an idealized name for an early king. You're shielding the borders so that the harvests can flourish and the people can prosper. And he's shielding from the threats of enemies and smiting them and depriving them of their mead seats, which is a rather interesting kenning or poetic phrase for saying he conquered them and forced them to drink at his place, as my old mentor Tom Shippey put it. And we hear, it's only alluded to, but to cut a long story short, this idealized King Shield is first appears amongst the Danes as a baby, asleep on a sheaf of wheat, surrounded by weapons, and in a drifting boat. It's one of these great origin legends of great founding heroes. It goes back to ancient Mesopotamia. Of course, later on in the Old Testament, you've got the legend of the birth of Moses, and it very much draws on some very early ideas indeed, a kind of culture hero, and adopted by the Danes, who are currently kingless and rather dramatically depicted here in an old book of Danish legend. And true to form, he grows up to become their great war leader, smites the enemies, founds the dynasty, and this provides the opening movement of Beowulf. Now you should have an extended version of the Royal Families of Devon. This is just the Danish one, founded by this legendary boat-borne hero who goes on to found. That's how we're introduced to the main characters in Beowulf, not least the wise old Hrothgar and his formidable lady Wealhtheow, who has some very interesting connections, helping him just up the Demon Valley on a tributary not far from Sutton Hoo. But that's the subject of another lecture. So when he's completed Shield's legendary life, how else can he be given a send-off than in a boat that mirrors his legendary advent? And this is what culminates the opening movement. And it's a wonderful description, but it really brings to life the bare bones of the archaeology at Sutton, who he talks about. I'll just give you a little flavour of it. In the Old English, der húða stood, ringed stefna, Ely and Oudfus, Adlinges far. Laid on der leofni theoden, Baga Britain on barm shippers, mani bemast. There was Mad Mafella of Fair Wigham, Fratwa Yeledid. I hope you can see the interlinear literal translation, just to give a sense of the richness of its meaning. But you lose a lot in translation of the beauty of the initial poetry, so I haven't taken the translation any further at this stage. But you can see, I hope, a flavour of that and how it can bring to life a great ritual like that entailed by the archaeology of the Sutton Hoo ship burial. And it continues very much like that, of striking, it talks about him given battle weapons, war gear, etc., many treasures, the travel afar. And this is a key passage. Neles hi hyn y lasym lacwm teod an theod yestrion ond an dda dudan. The hindi at frumshaft a fourth on sendi andi over uda ombo wezenda. They did not give him any less gifts and offerings than did those. I've capitalized that because that's a very unusual thing that the pronoun should be stressed like that, and it's referring elusively to the divine agencies over the horizon who'd sent him at the beginning as a baby over the waves. And so it's clear that the ship funeral is designed to mirror the legendary advent and thus bring the legend to life. And this, I think, very much forms a kind of mythic precedent for what we see at Sutton Hoo and related sites. And also, it implies that the thing is it's not a literal ship burial in the sense of the ship being laden and set adrift in the hopes of going to find its way to heaven. In the River Demon, it would run aground at Ramsholt like everything else does, or on one of the shingle banks at the mouth of the river. It's a symbolic voyage, of course it is. You don't want all that treasure just floating about like that. And anyway, it's given to the word garsage is not lit. It's a poetic term for the sea. It doesn't mean literally, the North Sea. It's hence, as Seamus Heaney has done, the encircling sea or ocean with a capital O. And so all this. And the mourners, it's got a lot to do with the mourners, as any funeral does, their sad hearts and mourning mood. But all this giving and this richness helps to offset that sense of loss with a sense of thanks, giving, I think, gratitude. And then the final lines, Ben the kudon, sejan tu suda, salaraden de haleth on the hiovanum, huatham lasta onfeng. Men cannot say in truth, wise ones in hall or heroes under the heavens. That is, no mortal man, neither the wisest under the roof of the great hall or the strongest, the physically most powerful under the roof of heaven, who received that lading, that precious treasure load on the ship. They cannot say because it had passed beyond all mortal knowledge. That very tidily denotes the sense of the limits of mortal knowledge and denotes the sense that heaven is over the horizon, just out of sight of these mortal shores. Again, beautifully simply expressed here, very powerfully amplifying that basic notion of death as a point of departure across water. And this, in turn, resonates throughout so much of the ensuing English literature, not least the famous, and perhaps the most famous part of the great Arthurian literature that we all remember, the death of Arthur. And like this story where the hero comes as a baby across the sea and then returns over the horizon, thus leaving open the possibility that he can return again, so Arthur. famously, of course, on his death, he is taken across the water. And the earliest clear English version of that, in fact, I think the first is written about 1190 by a West Midlands poet called Layman, who's still writing in Old English alliterative poetry, although the structure of the poetry is changing, rhyme is coming in more, but still alliterative poetry is still being taught, as is literature in the English language is still being taught and learned. And famous words of Arthur: "Ich will fahren to Avalon, to fairest Alva Medina, to Arganta their Quen, Alven swither Sheona. I will fare to Avalon, to the fairest of all maidens, to Arganta the queen, the most shining of elves." And Layman's thing is to bring in the elves to the story from Old English poetry. And so she shall make my wounds all sound. All hail make me with healing draughts. And after I will come to my kingdom and dwell amid Britons with much joy. Very powerful stuff indeed. And I would say that Sutton Hoo and the literature that amplifies it is providing a precedent for all this wonderful stuff that flowers so later, much later, in Arthurian literature. And that's just the first version of it. It goes on to, of course, later versions, not least Mallory. And, oh, hang on a minute, I've got my wrong button. So, right, well, let's, there are a lot of other ways in which we can make sense of that, amplify that basic notion as well. And let's not forget, I'm not going to get time to do that, I don't think, before coffee, the great traditions that follow. Tennyson's Crossing the Bar is a poem that follows it beautifully. The great conclusion of Toby Smollett's novel, The Confessions of Peregrine Pickle. I don't know, it's used by Rupert Bruce Mitford in the frontispiece of Volume 1 of his great report. In fact, let's just do that and then we can have the questions. This is his great seagoing hero, Commodore Hawser Trunnion. It's a comic novel in many ways, but this strikes a really powerful and deep note. And the old boy is dying, and young Peregrine Pickle is in tears, and but the old boy is ready to go, and as he puts it, and gives full instructions for his nautical funeral. "As soon as the breath is out of my body, let minute guns be fired, till I am safe underground. I would also be buried in the red jacket I had when I boarded and took the French ship to the Renommee. Let my pistols, cutlass, and pocket compass be laid in the coffin along with me. Let me be carried to the grave by my own men, rigged in the black caps and white shirts which my barge's crew were wont to wear, and they must keep a good lookout until the carcass is belayed by a tombstone. As for the motto, or what you call it, I leave that to you and Mr. Jolter, who are scholars. But I do desire that it may not be engraved in the Greek or Latin lingos, and much less in the French, which I abominate, but in plain English, that when the angel comes to pipe all hands at the great day, he may know that I am a British man, and speak to me in my mother tongue. And now I have no more to say, but God in heaven have mercy upon my soul, and send you all fair weather, wheresoever you are bound." The thing would swivel behind that T-shaped mount there. Where's that thing gone? There we are. Little mushroom shape hiding the hinge at the swivel point. And then another hinge there. Look at that. You've actually got, can you see the hinge? Even on the inside of the mechanism of the hinge are tiny little garnets laid around the mechanism of the hinge. It's absolutely astonishing and surely above and beyond the call of duty. And yet there's a sense they are delighting in their skills in this place. This is an amazing detail, truly fit for a king. Not many people would notice it, but those that did no doubt would appreciate it greatly. And the whole set, again, matching a suite of sets of mounts, almost certainly have come from the same workshop, though some would argue that the pommel was the point of departure for it all. A little bit of wear on the beading of the pommel, and so yeah, that that mount joined to the lower part of the sword by that lovely amount. Well, we got gold up to 83.2%, and inset with 141 garnets, and then back up to that T shape, and then the top of that T matched with two other pairs. You can see round there and there, and close up on one each of those pairs. There's a sort of variation on the mushroom shaped cell with the garnet inlays on top. This pair, this is one of the pair, showing the beginnings of the more ambitious flowing interlace pattern in the golden garnet. That would have been much more difficult to do than that. And Rupert Bruce Mitford suggests that what they've done is they use a slightly they widen the gold cell wall in places to create more of a so the middle of the curve is more sort of like little beads, and he would suggest this is the beginning of the technique that we see so beautifully flowered in the shoulder clasp that we looked at a little while ago. And again, as with the shoulder clasp, they're anticipating developments in the new medium of the 7th century that comes in with the church, the scholarship of the church, and the technology of the book. And so, as George Henderson, great historian from Cambridge, has pointed out, this is less well known than the Book of Lindisfarne, but certainly from the same school of manuscript art, a kind of wonderful Anglo-Irish cross-fertilization of skills. These patterns here, you can see they very much look like manuscript design variations of these kinds of golden garnet mounts. And in fact, this is, again, well established, as I said before, that art historians acknowledge that the designs that are used in the new manuscript art medium are being borrowed directly from the designs of personal golden garnet regalia. And then the whole belt held together by that lovely buckle, again part of the matching set, 83% gold, 40% silver, 103 garnets. And so that's the belt itself. And then there's some astonishing details on and around the scabbard, particularly a little pair of buttons we'll look at in a moment that secure the top of the scabbard to the belt. And then these little straps, almost certainly part of the sword knot, which would initially be used to bind the sword into the scabbard, but once drawn would be kind of like a form of wrist loop for the wielder. The strap ends are this little pair of pyramid mounts. And this is the finest picture I found so far, again, thanks to the trustees of the British Museum for this. Again, very high magnification picture of what are two tiny mounts. You can see the scale we're looking at. They're just about half an inch, just under half an inch high, and about 3/4 of an inch square. Yet each one is packed with 110 inlays of garnet, millefiori glass, and blue glass. That blue glass is beautifully placed in these chevron shapes on the corners with absolute precision. They're almost a perfect matching set. In fact, it's hard to fault them. The symmetry is immaculate in every face, and it's got lovely details like the way that the prism-shaped garnets on the edges bend. You can see the light is varying in this picture with the gold foil underlay catching the light. It's light bending, in effect, and it changes the colour from a sort of dark red to a pink to a orange. So if you go to the British Museum, take a little torch with you and play with the light, and it'll be a little light show from the 7th century, the Golden Age, will delight you. But you've got to look hard, because when you see big images like this, it's quite sobering when you see the originals because they're so tiny. And lovely little millefiori glass on top. And look at the perfect angles there. Look at, as Rupert Bruce Mitford marvelled at, the precision with which the upper corner garnets are laid in. They are cut and faceted in 3 dimensions with total precision at a scale of less than 1/10 of an inch. And yet you cannot fault them. I think Catherine Hills pointed out, you cannot get a cigarette paper between the garnets and the gold cells in which they are set. so accurate is the coordination of the garnet cutting and the formation of the gold cells. And so much more difficult in 3 dimensions than in the flat 2-dimensional designs we've been looking at so far. And then along the bottom edges, there's little garnets fallen out. You can forgive that. Those are barely bigger than the size of grains of sand. And yet you can see, especially in this light, the precision with which they are cut. So again, technically absolutely awesome and beautiful in their completion there. And yet very functional. They help form the terminals of the knots, the straps forming the sword knot. You can see from the excellent Rupert Bruce Mitford plan here, they're hollow and there's a bar along the base for the strap to connect. These are a couple of pictures I took. I probably wasn't supposed to take these pictures when they were on display at the Sutton Hoo, when we used to get treasure in the real treasure room at Sutton Hoo, summer 2002. And I played with the light a bit there to get the light bending quality. You can see the variation between that one and that one. They're not very good pictures, but they give you a sense of the great fun that you can have with the light. So the strap ends, and then the pair of buttons. It's the little things that are the most astonishing. Now buttons, little round-headed buttons with little D-shaped loops, not unlike the shape of the buttons I've got on my tweed jacket here. And yet these are the most beautiful buttons I've ever seen. If there was ever a PhD thesis on the history of the buttons, these surely would be right up there on the front cover. You can see that, well, the technicals again, we're just under 1 inch in diameter. They are just about that in height, if you include the D-ring. Gold up to 89% pure, each one set with 110 garnets, including finely milled garnets that have been sort of shaped to form a little sort of grip effect on the edge of the button, which is just where you need to be able to get a grip on the button there. And the garnets that form the dome of the button, they are all shaped, gently curved to fit perfectly, so that there are no lumps. It's a completely clean surface across the dome of the button. Absolutely amazing. And again, I can't resist quoting George Henderson here. They are among the finest cloisonné jewels in existence. That's in the present tense. There's really very little that comes up to the quality of this stuff right up to the present day. I've also caught something here. You can see with the gold foil underlay. Notice too, it comes out a bit more clearly in this one, I think. Garnets of a lighter hue, sort of more light orangey garnets, to form and enhance what is there in the design, a cross pattern, a cruciform pattern. And that is Rupert Bruce Mitford's plan of how that lovely design works. And many would argue, though not all would agree, that this is a deliberate Christian symbol incorporated into design of something that it would have been an object very, very personal to the king, his sword, which no doubt, judging from Beowulf and related texts, that sword would have had a name, a personal name that he would have used to refer to it by. And it fits with what is an interesting factor about Sutton Hoo, that its religious character, that we should not, I think we should ditch the black and white hard edge concepts of Christian and pagan. In fact, I think we should eschew the word pagan altogether. It's a label which obscures more than it illuminates. And what we're looking at, is a traditional pre-Christian style of burial, although one could argue that the use of a ship in a burial rite, the whole metaphor of crossing the boundary between worlds in a vessel like that, is actually a concept, as I've suggested before, that everyone will understand. It actually transcends religious difference. And it's no accident that this great symbolism of the ship is fully incorporated into the narrative of Christianity. So we talk about anchors of faith, and we have naves, ship-like naves in churches, and so on. So part of this religious character, what is a transitional religious character in the interesting times of the 7th century, is one of the strong clues that points towards Radwold, who had Bede condemns him for his Temple of the Two Altars, but his response to the changing nature of the times was actually highly commendable and a very interestingly diplomatic one under the political circumstances. Bede is writing later and can afford to take a harder line. So anyway, I discussed some of this in my little book on Radwold, and so I think these are really potent things. And in fact, again, in the continuum of art history, in this design, this particular design anticipates the shift I've already mentioned, the change in medium, the shifting of religious allegiances, and so it's no accident, I think, at all. I think it's completely pertinent that we find pendant crosses that are using the same medium in this transitional stage, such as this lovely one. That's the one from Stanton, near Ixworth in Suffolk, found in the, I think, late 19th century, now in the Ashmolean. That lovely pendant cross, gold and garnet. This one particularly is from Wilton Hockwold on the Fen Edge there in northwest Suffolk, sorry, which has some of the chevron patterns and mushroom shapes. It very much looks like it's come from the Sutton Hoo school. Coin of Hercules, a very fresh-looking coin of Hercules, Emperor of Byzantium. So that could be dated as early as 630, sort of within, within 5 years or so of the Sutton Hoo ship burial. If you take 625 as the average date, which I think is a reasonable one for Radwold's death. Certainly the art history period suggests that that is the date, as well as does the coinage, which we'll come to in a moment. So these little buttons are actually pivotal in the view that we have in the surviving examples of gold and garnet, in also realizing the shifting religious allegiances of the 7th century. And particularly with the Wilton cross, there's a direct kinship there of the design and the medium. And the later one, that's from the grave of St Cuthbert, who died, 680, from his tomb. The vaults of Durham Cathedral was found wrapped in the shroud when the tomb was examined in the 19th century. But they talk about the Golden Age up there. That's a very fine example of gold and garnet, but actually the garnets are not so. The design is much more static. You've got little sort of square garnets. You've got nothing like the intricacies you see in the Wilton cross or in its Sutton Hoo antecedents. And that one, that's a lovely pendant cross from the Staffordshire hoard with lovely filigree designs and a beautiful big crystal garnet that's been turned and polished on a lathe by the looks of things. So that's the school of art looking forward to the 7th century, as less gold is about towards the end of the century. We have a declining gold standard in the 7th century, which just illuminates all the more, I think, the beauties of the design of the earlier 7th century. And so that's looking forward. But what are the antecedents of it? Well, interestingly, in this case, we can see parallels. These buttons, or they're sometimes called scabbard bosses, which is quite handy because they fit with, we go back in time, earlier examples of a boss in gold and garnet showing a cruciform design. This is one of a pair of brooches from a female burial in Domignano in Rimini in northern Italy, from an Ostrogothic burial. So this is a generation before Sutton Hoo, or perhaps 2 generations. And there's, again, it shows us a clear kinship in the medium and in the design, albeit the Sutton Hoo one looking much more sophisticated and elaborate and beautiful. But nevertheless, in their day, these would be very fine things indeed. And indeed, the whole eagle design is another way we can trace something back, feel our way back into the earlier art history, where all these astonishing skills that flower so astonishingly beautifully at Sutton Hoo come from. And in many ways, it do lead to Goths, who get a bad press, of course. So that's the pair from northern Italy, matched by another pair from Visigothic Spain, from Badajoz. scene of a great siege in the Napoleonic Wars. And they all anticipate the paired eagle design is, as you can see on there, is absolutely beautifully done here. That is the purse lid from Sutton, which we're about to come to. But just on that point, and I'm hoping one day that this can be amplified, it puts Sutton Hoo on a much broader continental perspective, which is what the whole medium is doing anyway, especially as the garnets, some of the garnets seem to originate ultimately, geologically speaking, in the subcontinent of India, either Sri Lanka or Jalalabad. And we're looking at a much broader perspective, what I call the international garnet set sometimes, only half jokingly. And you can see a clear pattern in the medium that takes us back through Visigothic Spain, Ostrogothic Italy, and beyond to earlier Gothic burials before the Goths came to Italy and Spain, when they were part, when they were in what is now Eastern Europe. In fact, if you go back to the 4th century, you have a great Gothic empire stretching from Scandinavia to the Black Sea under their great king Jormunrich. And these, that's from Apahida and Petros, are now in Romania, were very much Carpathians, were very much heartland for the Goths until the coming of the Huns. So there's a real deep history here, which is we can begin to chart, which is very, very exciting. However, holding myself back, let's get back to the soil of Sutton Hoo in 1939. Now, those beautiful pair of eagle mounts come from the purse lid, and there it is in the burial in as revealed in 1939. And again, over on the left, in fact, the purse lid is upside down, and you're looking at the mounts from the back. And although the wood or leather of the purse itself, it is clearly defined by its gold frame, and the mounts undisturbed are still where they should be. And look, there's one little sword belt mount there. And over here is the great gold buckle that goes with the money belt. And that's what they're going to look like. So let's look at the buckle first. Again, an iconic for the whole school of art, this vigorous interlace pattern with animal shape, zoomorphic interlace, Sarline style too, really is astonishing. Also distinguished by, let's see the little biting beast there, beautiful example of the type. And hooded birds of prey. They seem to like eagles, birds of prey. And a distinctive feature of the Sutton Hoo workshop seems to be the little Y shape that is formed at the back of the bird's beak. You get this in other places at Sutton Hoo as well. Especially one of the repairs, a local repair with that design is like a local trademark. And there are parallels, of course, the big three-bossed circular tongue plate buckle, but nothing to compare with the scale or intricacy of this one. Gold up to 89% pure look, and weighing nearly a pound, 412 grams. That is amazing. The nearest parallel that Noel Adams spotted is, sorry, slightly lumpy picture, but you can see the kinship and the design, I hope. 3 bosses, circular plate, interlaced patterning. But that's from a Frankish royal grave, Saint-Denis, Merovingian kings and queens. But look how much lumpier it is compared with the intricacy of this one. And again, manuscript parallels, again, the Book of Durrow. You can see again the ribbon work of the interlaced patterning, very, very similar to, as if it's copied from an image like the Sutton Hoo buckle. And also that's the image of St. John, the eagle. Again, look at the patterning of the eagle. Look at the sort of rather lumpy. It's as if it is a direct copy of a cloisonné one, or at least an adaptation of it. And the patterning there looks a bit like gold, garnet, and blue glass. So it's got a bit green in places. Anyway, from the great belt secured by that buckle, and he is wearing that in the burial, this sporran-like purse hangs down from it, and that's the restored. The British use this rather sort of ordinary. I think they use a sort of plaster. Looks a bit opaque, doesn't it? But you can see the detail there, and you've got the detail down below. no less than 1,561 inlays of garnet, blue and millefiori glass filigree. Again, you've got tiny garnets on the inside of the lid, the hinge of the lid. And actually looking at the development of technique and style that go hand in hand in this astonishing workshop, you can see the static designs in that pair. Then they go for more flowing interlace pattern. There they really find the technique that gives them complete flexibility. They would have whole cells that would be lidded in gold, so they could a much more intricate and highly stylized pattern of interlaces there. And get to the point as we see it with the masterpiece shoulder clasp. In fact, we're looking at another masterpiece of a master workshop here, actually representative art, and that little pair of eagle mounts taking the smaller bird of prey. They're just beautiful. And the detail, again, look at the way they've stylized the feathers. You've got far more garnets in there than you really need. You know what you're looking at, but again, a sense they are delighting in their skills. And the birds of prey always hooded. It's interesting too. I like Paul Mortimer's replica, actually made by Ganderwick Creations, Dave Roper, of using a kind of red leather. I think that works a bit better. And he hasn't cut garnets, he's simulated the garnets with a kind of acrylic gel, which gives you a rough idea. And of course, he's got the cells a bit lumpier than the original, as you could contrast and compare. But nevertheless, they're pretty good replicas, I think. And I mentioned again that the background ultimately back to Visigoths, Ostrogoths, and Goths in general. The pattern of the outer pattern, man between wolves, I think we should call it, which is very interesting because the pattern, highly stylized. I look upon it as a kind of proto-heraldic emblem of the family, the dynasty of the early East Anglian kings and queens, the Woofings, the descendants of Woofer, the little wolf, and as if the wolf is some sort of protective, ultimately totemic agency in the family. So I think that's a very appropriate emblem to find here in an East Anglian rich burial like this. And the contents of the purse, a very odd collection of coins, 37 gold coins. Each one is different from Francia. 3 gold blanks, rounding the number up to 40. 40 looks significant. And 2 gold ingots. And there have been great fun on the theories of what that odd collection might mean. Was he 40 when he died? We don't know when he was born. Or is the number 40 to correspond to the number of oarsmen that would have provided the auxiliary propulsion of the vessel? 20 oars aside, with the ingots, one for the helmsman and one for the captain, a kind of pre-Christian divine marine insurance plan, as the saga seems to suggest, that was a tradition of carrying a piece of gold for each member of the crew to secure good luck. We don't know, but whatever the collection might mean in that sense, and there's another factor, that the diplomatic connections with the Merovingian kings, it does enable a date, or at least the possibility of a bracket of dates as to when this collection could have come together. And I think the latest suggestion from Gareth Williams is that it's sometime between the year 618 and 630. And assuming that the collection was brought together not long before the burial, that might be quite an assumption. That's why we talk about a date of circa 625 for this burial. We've got no other scientific dating on that, regrettably, which is why we can talk about King Radwald, or I think in Old English his name would have been Hradwald, as the most likely candidate. Not only does the date fit, I've already mentioned the religious character, as well as the great success of his reign. He was not just a king of East Anglia. I would argue, as I've done in my little study of King Radwald, that he should be reckoned as the first king of England, and therefore in receipt of tribute and connections much more widely than any other king. and all of the alternative suggestions, some people have suggested Sigebert, the date might just fit, but the circumstances of his death are hardly conducive to a rich royal burial like this. So though we've got no really solid evidence, we've got no runic inscription to say that Radwold lay here, for example, he remains on the present set of often converging yet independent indications the most likely candidate by far, and hence the importance of him, and what's also kindling interest in the rest of the family. All of which brings us to, doesn't time fly when I do all the talking? Just to summarise, and I put this little montage together based on an old British Museum children's book of the Anglo-Saxons, and I like a simple line drawing. An old man lying in state and giving you a rough idea of where we've been. So we looked at the shoulder clasps, we looked at the sword on the right there, we looked at the belt, and then the money belt. But there's, yes, you can see there's a great deal of other stuff that I haven't had time to do justice to. The old helmet lying above his left shoulder rather. The great mass of feasting equipment at his feet, including the huge silver dish of imperial quality feasting silver, as big as a shield. His own shield up at the west end there, a beautiful thing in itself. A few mystery objects like the strange iron stand. You can see the old Sutton Hoo exhibition. I rescued that from the skip with Les's help. Behind me, the beautiful decorated whetstone, and his own harp there, squashed between two bronze bowls, and thus preserving the top of it, the pickling effect of the copper in the bronze. And then there's all, yeah, the feasting equipment could be a whole other lecture in itself, but that's a good point to pause. The Deben and the Old seem to form the main arteries of this little corner of East Anglia, what's now South East Suffolk, where the later hundreds sort of provide a kind of what Tom Williams sort of a ghost of an earlier territory, which very much looks like the core territory of the Woffing Kingdom, centred as it is on Rendlesham, where so much interesting work has been there going on and is ongoing there. Oh, I've got a, yeah. Rosemary's just given a link to the series of lectures. We'll come back to that later. Archaeologically, Sutton Hoo and Snape, there where we get the ship and boat burials of the time, and it's a lovely landscape. It hasn't had the attention that Sutton Hoo has had. I've marked barrow sites in red on this Google image. Recent archaeology of Barber's Point, a former island. We have a little church and a cemetery there as well. And Icon is almost certainly the main site of the minster of the great pioneering St. Botolph, the first abbot, the first major Benedictine monastery in England. And it's up here, up this little tributary here, Ham Creek as it's called down below, that was the route where the Snape ship burial was taken. And it's the, let's go into a bit more detail on the Snape site. There we are, that's the main road from Snape to Aldborough that goes right through the heart of the site. This rugby pool shaped area is the cemetery. You've not just got barrows. Mound 1 is where the ship burial was. And there's just a little hint when you imagine yourself standing in the hedge there and not getting run over by the 60-mile-an-hour traffic on this straight road. You can see in, it's all a bit overgrown now, they're the Scots pines that the old Wentworth people planted to protect the heart of the site. You can just see a little bump there, which is the northern edge of a barrow, which would have come out there and gone partly across the road. It's possibly when they were making and widening this road in 1863 was the occasion of the excavation. So there's a little tiny hint of the remains of the barrow there in the trees. And this is a watercolour from the quite comprehensive 1863 journal report. In fact, we have two, which we can contrast and compare. Very good paper on this by Rupert Bruce Mitford in Aspects of Anglo-Saxon Archaeology. I showed you the volume earlier. And the stern there has been damaged, and a bit like Sutton, actually, the western end of the barrow had already been damaged, possibly plough damage. So it would have been pointed stern like the bows, and it would be heading pointing east again, and burgled. But the burglars had missed that. They must be really annoyed. They found that out, and the only decent surviving barrow is a bit overgrown here, but here it is. I showed you a glimpse of this. That is Mound 4. That was after it got cleared early in 2018, but it's already overgrown again. But they all help protect it. And it's just in the edge of that, we had two little boat burials. This is clearly a little satellite burial to Mound 4. And that was the shape in the ground there. That's really impressive. You can see the stain of the side of it. I say dugout boat. It's actually a very fine little canoe. Another image of it there. And there's a little shield placed across the bow there. That's the boss of the shield. And also included a beautiful sword with a preserved horn handle. And possibly an adolescent buried there because the soft bone had not survived at all. But we know he was there. And just along from there, another very exciting find. So that's looking... the road is there. There's the Mound 1 ship burial was there. Mound 4 is just off to the right. Just over here, almost destroyed by the road, the ditch and the rabbits, was a warrior poet. You can see the outline of his harp, his lyre, a cradle in his left hand, which is how he would have carried it, and protected by the copper fittings, bronze fittings on the shield. And he's also got a spearhead and a knife blade, a little flint and steel there. And he's a warrior poet. And very exciting. Graham Lawson, the great archaeology museum man, very excited by this. This is the kind of character who would have maintained the Old English poetry of the kind we find preserved in Beowulf. So this was a really great find. And it's a cruel irony that much of the Alba Festival traffic virtually runs over his grave and doesn't even know he's there. There should be some sort of proper presentation, like a blue plaque and information and a place you can pull in. But at the moment, it's still a very dangerous, fast road. So let's brief look at Snape, and then Taplow. That's a look at that place name there, from the Old English Tapper's Hlow, Tapper's Barrow, the barrow of somebody called Tapper, which looks like a nickname for unusual name, who may thus have his name otherwise forgotten, preserved in the place name. So he's likely to be the one that lay in state in this barrow. And there's Time Team 1883 look. The map there showing it's very high point over the river. Lovely view from the top there. We had a Sutton Society visit there. Oh, that was a long time ago. But the name, therefore, of an otherwise lost and forgotten king of the what would have become the people known as the Middle Saxons, Middlesex, and that's Lindsay Kerr's redrawing of the image. And very interesting, he seems to have 3 sets of shields and spears. Again, there's an army factor here, so he would have his he'd have his dress uniform, his number 1s and his mufti or number 2s, and a wealth of feasting equipment too, not least the gaming pieces and the drinking horns and the harp. And that all that was left of the harp were these gilt bronze, again, eagle head fittings from the crosspiece of the harp. And they didn't know what they were at first, and in the original 1883 list of finds, they suggested that there possibly might be decorations from bucket handles, but they turn out to be the fittings, and here's a lovely replica by Michael King, who's in the business of making these replicas, and recommend you visit his website if you're interested, of the Taplow lyre there. And the Thanes of Mercia have done a very fine replica of that as well. And so that's Taplow. And then Prittlewell, 2005. This was a an occasion sort of north end of, in fact, Prittlewell is the senior parish, at the south end of which Southend developed. And this is overlooking the Prittle stream. Sorry, I'm just going back one. The little brook flowing north into the Rochford River. It's overlooking that rather than the Thames estuary. And yeah, you can see it, no, it's just off to the left there. And this is a very busy corner of Southend, so there are plans to widen the road, but it was known from when they built the railway here that this was an Anglo-Saxon cemetery, and therefore the archaeologists had to do, as hopefully does happen at the beginning of all building and road developments, archaeological attention. And you can see the Google Earth view showing it's neatly mowed, and you've got the reconstruction barrow, which looks a slight, I think they need to settle it. The marker there marks the site of the burial chamber. This was otherwise completely flat. When I first saw it, it was flat. And quite a narrow area. They couldn't take the spoil off site. So they but very fortunately, right there, in fact, it's absolutely focal to this bend in the road for some reason. They built the great barrow stood, and it had gradually seeped into the burial chamber beneath and filled up the chamber before the roof collapsed. So everything was sort of held in place. So we can, these lovely reconstruction drawings are possible. There's a very good summary of this on the prittlewellprinceburial.org website. It's now all on show in Southend Museum down on the front there. And very, very well excavated indeed. And again, you've got the pattern of rich feasting equipment, and there's a sword, and there's a shield there somewhere, and a buckle. This is the Museum of London Archaeology team at work, doing very, very well. Look at how sandy all that stuff is. And look at, you can see how stuff's preserved in a three-dimensional, because, as I say, the seeping of the sand. There's the sword there. This is a unique structure. Did you notice that on the previous? It's a folding stool, and I understand it's iron, but there are inlays in there. Somebody called that a mobile throne, which I thought was quite a good pun. And so work's going on. And the others said how appropriate a deck chair near Southend, but wonderful stuff. And Ian there's working on the buckle, and look at that. It's got the right shape, three bosses, gold. More lozenge-shaped tongue plate in this case, but it's part of a pattern, yet it's completely plain, and the edges are very sharp, as if it's actually never been properly used at all. It's as if it's sort of taken out of the workshop before it's finished. And compared with comparable buckles, there's one from Fingalsham, that's now British Museum. That's very similar, but decorated with a possible dancing warrior there. Taplow I've mentioned, with the lovely filigree and garnet inlays, but they're all rather dwarfed by the astounding one from Sutton Hoo. But the pattern is there, gold and rich feasting equipment, including the lovely, this is absolutely beautiful. Look at that, you can still see the remains of the iron peg on which it was hanging. That is a East Mediterranean ewer jug for wine. With beautiful attachments, little chain work. Actually, there's a fragment of something very similar found in Mound 3 at Sutton Hoo, the one with the funny oak burial, oak tray burial. And of course, in its day, this would have been shiny and beautiful, as well as all the lovely glass. I mean, it's got a bit cracked, but it's essentially all there. And other feasting equipment, these maplewood bottles, horns from drinking horns there. Really classy stuff. And most impressive of all for my money was this. There's a shadow of the royal lyre there with a couple of rusted spearheads lying across it. And that's the comparison with the Sutton Hoo reconstruction after a few false starts. And Graham Lawson, who is the archaeology of music, I mentioned him before, said that all the bottom half of this was from Sutton Hoo was a guesswork, but that Prittlewell seems to suggest that they were along the right lines. And that was all excavated in a block. This is first-class archaeology. There it is, all wrapped up and taped and And there it is in the Museum of London Laboratories being given a 3D scan, which reveal lots of interesting features. That's the top part, the yolk, and you can clearly see a big repair there. That's the detail of the repair. Plate there and a plate there with pins securing it. Let me, as on my, this is my replica of the, I didn't make this, it was made by an excellent violin maker from Mistley. But that Brittlewell harp had, oh, it speaks, had been severely, had been dropped, and all this had cracked, and a really difficult repair. To put a plate there with pins in between, carefully missing the peg holes. That's a really, why couldn't he just had a new one? The answer is, of course he couldn't have a new one. This was his Stradivarius. And it's that personal touch which really emphasizes that these things are not just thrown in for show. They are the part of the special property of the kings or princes, or whatever you want to call them, who lay in state in these burials. These would be their personal instruments, and may well have had names too. It's reminiscent of the burial of Bob Marley, great guitarist, buried with his Gibson guitar, of course, and a bag of herbal tobacco, as we might call it as well, incidentally. And so it's that personal touch I really think is important, and it reminds us that there were real people buried here, and that is Graham Lawson himself playing the replica. You can see how they constructed these things at Brittlewell, and that's all on one of the Time Team specials that I participated in. And possibly the burial of one of these East Saxon kings back in 2005 when we did the Time Team special. I suggested King Sabert, and I think that theory still holds, despite the, I think, rather exaggerated claims made in the light by Chris Scull in his rather jargon-ridden report. Use of jargon is always a sign that they're trying to camouflage something, it seems to me, who says it definitely can't be him. But the radiocarbon dating, the new calibration of that, suggests the burial could have been as late as 610, but it depends which model you want to use. He seemed curiously resistant to Sabert, and I think the evidence warrants the degree of resistance he held. Anyway, that's all incidental. So I think generally we can say that on the basis of these finds from southeast England, that we were already looking at something of a golden age. And what's really made the whole thing explode hugely is, again, a great metal detector is find just off the Roman road. Actually, that's the main old Roman road through Britain. That's Watling Street, as the Anglo-Saxons called it. In the parish of Hammerwich. Now, that's an interesting name, the Wick of the Hammers. That sounds like a smithy there, circled on the map here and on Google Earth here. Just there's Watling Street there. There's the M6 toll. The number of times many of us probably drove past that, not knowing what was in them hills. And if you, the overall landscape perspective, if you imagine yourself standing on the hill over here, looking across the railway and the motorway and the Roman road to this little hill here, this is the view you would have. And I've arrowed that little hill there. The highest point of the hill is the site of the find. And here's, imagine yourself standing in the field with the horses there, looking up towards it from the looking west from over here. You would see this. Very peaceful when I was there. March 2012, we were doing the Time Team special. In fact, you can see the crew up there. There's Baldrick wandering around there somewhere with happy horses. And initial find 2005, this was then brought in that was the Birmingham archaeology people excavating the area and finding what else was there. The ploughing had effectively scattered the accumulated treasure over a fairly wide area, as you can see there. And this was a sort of thing that was coming up. You can see, for example, an eye-shaped fitting of gold and garnet, separated from its original setting, and a 20p piece there to give you a sense of scale. So straight away in that image, you can see we're looking at similarly very, very finely cut garnets fitted with great precision into their gold settings. And I'll come back to that eye-shaped piece in a little while. And this led to an amazing challenge to make sense of all this. Fortunately, a grant was made available and money was found at least to keep it in the country. And then between various museums and committees, it's been worked out. And just like late last year, so only 10 years later, the report came out, and it's a lovely, lovely big hefty volume. This is such a massive, you can use it as a doorstop, but I recommend you don't do that because it's actually full of wonderful stuff. It's really, it's like old Bruce Mitford's great biblical reports on Sutton Hoo. You know, it's absolutely essential reference work. It's well written, and we've got the great Leslie Webster, who has contributed a great deal for it. She's worth her weight in gold. And Chris Fern has done really well. I think, young chap, he's made sense of this all, and lovely images. As well as that, we've got the Staffordshire Hall website, though you can get you can look closely at a lot of these images for yourself. And that's what most of it, that's one of the early pictures showing the kinds of things we were looking at. And already you're looking at something that is odd. In fact, the whole context of it has not really been explained because archaeologically it does, sorry, I'll move that. It does not look like a burial, far from it. As people have suggested, as it used to be a thing, if you couldn't think of anything else to explain it, it must be rituals. Do you remember that? The R word? But even that doesn't really, I think I don't buy that. That's desperate pleading, surely. What's odd about it is that there are lots of fittings from swords, but there are no blades whatsoever. There are lots of garnet and gold fittings that have been on something else and have been taken off them, and then all sort of chucked into a bag and buried in a field with no apparent archaeological features, just off the Roman road. You could argue, I mean, you can't rule out some sort of ritual belief in a pre-Christian sense that it's, but it doesn't explain the oddness of the collection. What it appears to be is, let's go to a slightly cleaner, this is one of the press release images showing a selection of some of the finds. But you can see the way they're all detached from things. There's a couple of lovely crystal garnet, that's a crystal garnet in those dog-tooth gold settings. There's a dog-tooth gold setting that the garnet has come out of. In fact, they're all connected to this. This is actually a folded gold cross, and it turns out to be the most beautiful and the biggest processional gold cross from early English church. This is a fittings from a shield, possibly a kind of eagle shape with something fishy in the middle. A pair of pyramid mounts. Actually, that's one of there's something like several dozen pairs of those, which is great because up to this point we only had a very limited number of those for a study. There's the pendant cross I showed you earlier. These are cross pieces from fittings from cross guards of swords and pommels, and it's very difficult to avoid the view that whatever the reasons for this being buried here, the initial collection looks like it's come out of the gold recycling bin of the Mercian Royal Workshop. These are fittings from weapons which have been they've been taken off the weapons, and possibly helmets and shields as well, and the blades have been refitted with new fittings and pommels, and then reissued. That we know there was an Anglo-Saxon legal tradition of where if you were in receipt of a sword from your king, it would effectively be only loaned to you, and you would, in your will, you would return it to the king, and that would be called, from the Old English, heriatu, war gear, that became known as the heriot. But this looks more, some of that, but there's so much of this. And so another interesting argument is, and one that Chris Fern, I think, amplifies quite convincingly, but it's still only a theory of interpretation, that some of this stuff represents fittings from arms and armour which had been captured in battle in the various wars that the Mercians had undertaken against their neighbours, including East Anglia. At least 3 East Anglian kings appear to have been killed by King Penda, the great warlord of Mercia, in the second quarter of the 7th century, which is the date that the art history of this stuff largely points to. Penda is so interesting, he's the villain of Bede's ecclesiastical history, which makes him even more interesting. But anyway, you can look at all this stuff in great details for yourself. I say this is now much of this material is on the Archaeology Data Service. Some of you probably already come across this. They have a vast archive of material here, and there's a whole section of the Staffordshire Hoard treasure, and so you can see many of the you can see subdivided. So you can look at helmet fittings, hilt collars, hilt plates, etc. All these sword fittings. I mean, there's so much, it's quite overwhelming in many ways. It's not as comprehensive as in terms of the background discussion of context and history as all of the lovely illustrations as the report, but it's a very useful resource anyway. So we could just take our time to look at a few of them, I think. For example, yes, there's cross guards there and there, but there's another one there which actually you can see some of the decoration. This is this one. Now the cataloguing system is a bit confusing. Originally it was all sort of labelled and numbered in a rather random way by Kevin Leahy, who rather vaguely put his initial in front of it all, but that's all been redone now. So just ignore the catalogue. This looks like a cross guard of a single-edged weapon. You can see there with the Anglo-Saxon, distinctive Anglo-Saxon knife that is called a sax, not a sax. It's pronounced sax. That is a diphthong, one of those vowels that has one sound, not two. No, it seems to be made of two vowels. And this was a very distinctive Anglo-Saxon multi-purpose Anglo-Saxon Swiss Army knife. They could use it for a lot of things, and this is a lovely example from Sittingbourne, which is silver inlay that bears the name of its owner or maker, Sigebecht. But this one is the most beautiful fitting. Look at the decoration on that is a gold version of the kind of running animal interlaced patterns that we see in the Lindisfarne Gospels. So again, the same sort of art historical continuum that we've already seen. And you've got to see rather damaged filigree edged fitting. That would be a little crystal garnet in there, and the other end as well. So this would have been a really classy piece. And the apparently deliberate prizing off of the garnets to separate out the gold, as I say, it suggests in the process of being recycled, but then for some reason the recycling was not completed. It wasn't melted down. It was all put in a bag and buried on the hill above Watling Street, presumably in a time of crisis. And we'll look at that potential historical context in a little while. And these things could be really impressive, long blades, a bit like the later, in fact it is the ancestor of the later Scottish dirk, a distinctive part of the sort of Highland regalia even now, although they're a bit shorter these days. And you can see from this rather weathered fragment of the statue of an Anglo-Saxon king, or rather possible gravestone of the Anglo-Saxon king of Mercia, Athelbold, who was buried at Repton, the great Mercian royal centre on the Upper Trent in 757, that he's riding his horse, he's holding a shield and a broad, you see the right arm, there's a broadsword above his head, and this is his sax worn horizontally, no doubt with a beautifully decorated hilt, crossguard and scabbard. In fact, that weapon set of the sword and dirk, sword and sax, is very much like the later Highland claymore and dirk parallel. And I mentioned, speaking of parallels, the Lindisfarne Gospels. Nearer actually is another one from the Book of Durrow. Very similar sort of biting beast continuum of forming a lovely zoomorphic interlace pattern there. And so what else have we got? Oh yes, another sack seems to have this piece. When I saw this for the first time, I thought that looks like Sutton Hoo Workshop. It's got the same distinctive It's a bit grubby. This is an older slide. It's still got some of the soil attached to it. The use of a running interlace pattern in gold and garnet, technically very, very difficult, as on the shoulder clasps, but here again used quite well. And actually little blue glass eyes in the creatures there. Amazingly, it was found that these sort of random collections, they found that some bits went with other bits. So this bit went with this bit, and you can see the same thing again. Look, the blue glass eye works quite well. It's got the gold foil underlay. I thought, Sutton Hoo Workshop, surely. And indeed, this is one of the interesting theories that Chris develops in the discussion and the interpretation section of the report. That some of the better stuff seems to have come possibly from booty captured in battle in the wars with East Anglia. So this could have been made in the same workshop. And so that bit went with that bit, and then there's this bit, and then a pommel on the top. Notice how it's bent. It's just ripped off its original setting. And Paul Mortimer's people, the Wolf Heldoners, and Dave Roper's done replicas of all these and created this lovely, it's actually a very dangerous looking weapon. Imagine a long carving knife, 18 inches long, and you wear it horizontally across your waist. And no doubt pattern welded. You can just see a hint of the pattern welding there. And you can see how, so all these things fit together to form, that's the official plan from the report. And that's the lovely rep. I like the way they've used, that is yew wood they've used for the actual material of the hilt, which is a beautifully grained wood when you work it. So that's really impressive. I say it's just, these are just a selection of, we haven't got time. I think the official tally is of all the fragments from Staffordshire Hoard amount to 4,599 individual fragments, of which 4 kilograms are made of gold, and the silver 1.7 kilograms, and as well as many loose garnets, and a whole wealth of, so I think that's, there's several dozen pommels, but no blades at all, like this sort of thing. You can see some of the garnets have fallen out. That one very clearly, and look at the gold foil underlay. You can see the way the gold foil underlay tucks up along the edge of the cell wall, which would have held that garnet in, well, in this case, obviously it hasn't. These garnets have also fallen in. They probably got damaged in the process of being taken off their tangs of the blades. But this one clearly is worn. Look at the top of that. That is wear from being worn. Perhaps when one could rest one's hand on the hilt of it, or perhaps just over polished. So that's a very fine one. This one also shows sign of wear, and again garnets have fallen into their cells. Beautiful garnets, and this is actually, this big chunk at the end is probably the site of a missing what they call sword rings, where you have a sort of ring shape attached to the hilt. I'll show you what I mean by that in a moment. So as well as the gold garnet, lots of silver, there's some gilt bronze ones, and gold filigree, beautiful gold filigree. That looks like there's a garnet falling out in the middle there. And talk about wear, you can see wear on the beading there, very clearly. You get that a bit on the Sutton Hoo one. But look, the top is not only worn, it's actually dented. And this raises the possibility that that could have been used quite physically. It is a tradition in many warrior societies that they will beat their weapons on their shields, either spears, in the case of the Zulus, or sword pommels. And you can imagine a sword pommel beating on a shield would, you know, at the start of battle to raise courage on your side and hopefully intimidate the enemy. Police riot squads still do it. So that denting there could be explained in that way. And then you've got, that's one of the oldest pommels, and artistically very interesting. It seems to have a kind of human face that's in the process of shape shifting. And on the other side, you can just see, look, there's a couple of, see that? That's a boar's head with a tusk and an eye and mouth, and also over there. And notice again the wear on the top. That could be late 6th century. The majority of the finds are second quarter of the 7th century, and 650 is now seen as the cutoff date. In the early stage of the research, they were saying it could be later 7th century, but it's first half of the 7th century. So any time after 650, but not how long do we want to go after that? It can't be many years after 650 that the crisis that led to the need to hide this stuff must have occurred. Anyway, a few more pommels first. This one, actually, this is awesome. Now, there's your regular cocked hat pommel shape of the 7th century. Lovely filigree and a lovely design with garnet and blue glass. We've seen some of that from Sutton. It's a lovely combination, the red and the blue. And here you can see preserved, rather stylized, what they call the sword rings. Now, originally, these clearly were rings attached by D-loops to the pommel, loose rings that, then they became stylized, so they're molded as all one piece. So that, and usually you get pommels with just the one. Here, we've got two rings attached to the pommel, and it turns out there are 2 other pommels that also have 2 rings attached. I'm just amazed. They talk about waiting for one to come along and 3 come along at once. The original context of these surely is these are the swords of earls or kings to whom great oaths would be sworn on the hilt of the sword. And rings and oath-taking, it all goes together in Old English culture. Beowulf shows it again and again. The giving of rings, the swearing of oaths. And in fact, that is the basis to a wedding ring. A wedding is an oath-taking. And the unity of those bound by the oath, symbolized by the ring. I mean, it's just such an ancient combination of symbolism there. But anyway, Staffordshire Hoard, lots of oath rings, including 3 pommels with double oath rings. Just amazing. And Chris he's not only a very competent archaeologist and writer, he's an artist too. And this lovely picture he's done showing how the sword hilt on which the double oath ring, lovely blue and red inlay pommel would have looked, and associated with other pieces as well. Interestingly, the artwork here, he suggests that not only do we seem to see objects in the hoard that have perhaps come from the Sutton Hoo workshop, but rather distinctive Northumbrian styles as well. And he suggests that the more Irish art presence that we see in Northumbria, particularly in the Lindisfarne Gospels, of course, may be a factor here. And of course, the Northumbrian was as much an enemy of Mercia as East Anglia was in the second quarter of the 7th century, in the time of King Penda, no less. Hence Bede's constant reference to him as a baddie. So I think it's very impressive that the way that Chris and Leslie and George Speak have been able to identify artistic influences that are coming into the Staffordshire Hoard collection that are coming from different parts of Britain in the first half of the 7th century. So anyway, that's just a selection of a very few of the pommels, the ones that impressed me. I was also very impressed with the pyramid mounts, and these are all now properly numbered as pairs with consecutive numbers. So 572 and 573 are together. They're all the views that you get from the Archaeology Data Service website on the Staffordshire Hoard. So you're getting views from top, bottom and all 4 sides. And you can see how beautiful it is, the combination of gold and garnets. But if you look carefully at one of those sides, now which one is it? Is it that one? Yeah, this one. Let's zoom in on that. You can see that. Let's look at those 2 sides. The symmetry is not quite straight. Lovely that they are. Sorry, my pointer doesn't work when I'm on Zoom. I'm talking about, yeah, look, that line there does not line up with that line there. So the symmetry on the design there. Similarly over here, they're a little bit on the skew. Beautiful that they are, and yet they're not up to the standards of the Sutton Hoo pair. And Lynette, one of the great mainstays of the old days at Sutton Hoo, before they decided to improve things there, she pointed out that as if they've just got the apprentice works there, we've got the master works, which was a nice comment for the local patriots anyway. So anyway, that's just one pair of several of these, in fact, quite a few of these pyramid mounts. Really special they are too. You can see, like Sutton Hoo, you've got Kevin's number in the way. Yeah, you can see a little bar at the back. Similarly, it's clearly a sword strap end for a sword knot. Anyhow, what else have we got in the time that permits us? The shield fitting, I mentioned that piece. That's very interesting. If you look at that's one of the official pictures from early on. It makes more sense when you look at the plan of it, and this comes from the little book that I think it's out of print now, that Chris Thurn published in advance of the report with George Speake, great art historian from Oxford, showing what looks like a pair of eagle shapes that are either side of what looks like kind of sort of scaly, well, is it a fish or is it a dragon? A bit like your boat you showed us earlier, Joanna. But then that's part of the ambiguity of art in those days. I mean, this is pre-Linnaean classification of what's natural, and that enables us to draw a line between the natural and the supernatural. I notice also, I've circled in red the interesting Y shape at the back of the beaks. You also get it on the little, see, that is a fish, but it's got little eagle heads attached to it as well. So this idea of shape shifting, I think, is something we need to bear in mind. And yeah, so the parallels with Sutton Hoo in that little, perhaps insignificant, but I think important detail otherwise. You've got it, I mentioned it on the Sutton Hoo great gold buckle. And this is actually a silver repair from one of the lovely hanging bowls. We didn't get time to look at that in any detail earlier. The same Y shape, that's a repair done in the Sutton Hoo workshop, which seemed to be very telling. And as for so much of this stuff, Wolf Hild in this workshop produced a lovely replica. You can see what we've got there, look. See, there's a fish, but is it a fish with the eagle attachments? I don't know. Anyway, shield mount in gold. And speaking of protective war gear, this shape here struck many people as being very much like the shape of a helmet's shield piece. And when you look at it like that, there it is. Although it's only, yeah, look at that, 61.3% gold, 36.8% silver, and 3.4% copper. Is it come from Welsh gold with the copper in there is a good question. Beautifully decorated, but that's quite soft for a piece of armour. The Sutton Hoo example is of iron, albeit with gilt bronze and tin bronze decoration on the outside. So not everyone's convinced that it's a shield, not least Andrew Evans, who also points out that it's got the way it goes, turns at a right angle in, there's quite a sharp edge in there, which you wouldn't want that next to your cheek, but then of course it would be padded on the inside, so I'm not sure how compelling that is, but it's still arguably an obstacle to accepting it as a helmet piece. However, this was part of Terry Herbert, who's the original metal detectorist guy who did so well, his finds, and there was a preliminary survey saying, oh, there's nothing else to find here, it's all, we've got it all. But then when they came back a couple of years later, they turned up the other cheek, and there it is, still caked in mud, but you can see with the mud on it, it's an identical design in there. And so going with the helmet interpretation, other pieces such as this rather bent fitting looks very much like the fitting from the crest of a helmet, and also little tin bronze and gilt bronze, indeed foil plates from a helmet, very similar to Sutton Hoo and some of the related finds from Sweden. And so this led to the reconstruction of these pieces in the form of a helmet. and there's actually with a crest sticking out of the of that bit, which it does look quite impressive, and it makes sense in some respects. I'm just a bit worried. I'm not completely convinced, and several people have also expressed doubts, not least Dave Roper, who did some work on the replicas. There's a bit of a curve there, which doesn't quite fit with the rather flattened edge of the lower helmet there. And also, if you look at the design, the way it works, it's actually would be, if you're looking at it hanging on the side of a helmet, it would be upside down. What I've done here is I have put it artistically what should be the right way up. So you're looking at it, do you see what I mean, with the creatures the right way up? But that might not be a compelling argument for or against, but it's just one of those things. It makes more sense when you, what's that? Oh dear, my thing fell down, never mind. It makes more sense that way up. Anyway, well, it's ongoing work, and what else have we got? Oh, this is quite exciting as well. We got just a bit more time to, amongst the fragments, lots of edge bits. What could they be? And again, wonderful work from Chris Fern and his team that makes sense of putting these fragments back together as they would have been. And this looks like, see, lovely with garnets, tiny garnets again. I'm very pleased with this interpretation. Makes perfect sense as a, oh, not that one, a saddle fitting. And we have a lovely description of a highly decorated, bejeweled saddle in Beowulf, which is one of the old Hrothgar, King Hrothgar himself gives it to the hero. So that's a very satisfying interpretation, I think. And it also makes sense of those the funny eyes. I mentioned that one earlier. We've got two eyes, another one turned up, a pair of eyes, as well as these fittings, which need to be part of the bridle as well. This is a nice little sketch by Chris Fern again. And he suggests that these eyes would have been on the blinkers of the horse, which is very, I'm talking to horsey people about this. It'd certainly be possible. It was tradition for many years when we had the old Suffolk punches and other draft horses, that the blinkers would all be decorated with horse brasses. And a bit like Mound 17, beautiful decorations that seem to be the kind of precedent for the later decoration of horses. And so I like this interpretation, though I think the eyes should be at 90 degrees in keeping with the shape of a horse's eyes. I think he's got that slightly wrong. And also this strap here would not be right. The blinkers would be open on the sides so the horse could see forward. The point is that the blinkers are to stop the horse being distracted or frightened by anything in its peripheral side vision. And also usually they're associated with draft horses rather than openly ridden horses, though there are contexts in which that could occur. Anyway, that's again ongoing thinking there. And we must just finalise that with the Great Gold Cross, which is that piece there. That's how it looked in the British Museum in 2009 when I first saw it. And since lovely work's been done by Chris and others showing the garnet fittings up the ends of the cross. This one, for example, which has actually been damaged, and then the repair filled with gold and another little, apparently separate piece of garnet has been shaped to fit in there. That's actually had a bit of damage to it too. It doesn't, when you see it from the side, it looks a little bit lumpy, but originally that would have been, as you can see at the top, that garnet had been turned and milled to form those little circular grooves at the top. And these would have decorated the ends of the cross. These represent, in other words, the 5 wounds of Christ. But when you look at the arms of the cross, you can see a lovely little, that is, I think that's been chip carved into the gold of the cross, a pair of interlacing dragons. And this is a design straight out of the pre-Christian Book of Design. We find an identical design, albeit embossed in gilt bronze, embossed from the back. Is that the word I'm looking for? Pressed onto a die from the back. So it's a slightly different medium, but the design is effectively identical. 2 interlacing dragons. completely symmetrical. And here's Chris Fern and George Speak's explanation of that. Lovely drawing out of the patterning there. And so what we're looking at is the most beautiful example of an early processional cross. That was the garnet we were just looking at, using pre-Christian art designs within it. Again, it's part of the fascinating transitional nature of the times. Art and poetry crossing the boundary between what seemed to be rather hard-edged religious differences, although that hard edginess is largely determined by hardliners like Bede. The reality on the ground, clearly, as the artwork shows so impressively, was much more transitional. And so other parallels I've just noticed in working up this, not only is there a parallel with the Sutton Hoo bottle from the drinking equipment, but with the Sutton Hoo shield, where we have these, this is the lovely Dave Roper replica, these beautifully decorated strips across the front. That one's actually got an O3 on it, which is unique. And so this is the plan, that's the replica, so it's not terribly clear, but you can see a very similar, beautifully patterned interlace, zoomorphic interlace with feet. That I think that's another parallel with the artwork on this great cross. I'll have to talk to Chris about that and Leslie. But either way, this is an absolutely astonishing find. And the fact it's all folded up and going to be melted down and recycled strongly suggests that it is not anything to do with the Mercian Church. It is booty captured from the enemy. In this case, it might well be an East Anglian enemy. And we know of King Sigebert, I mentioned earlier, Radbold's stepson, who was actually killed in battle against the Mercians while he had taken vows. He was actually dragged out of the monastery to face the enemy, but it didn't do him any good at all. He's really a martyr king, old Sigebert. He should be canonized. And so that again, that's just a selection. We're looking at the battle zone of Mercia, which grows up around the Upper Trent. The site of the burial Staffordshire Hammer, which is actually on the western edges of early Mercia, and their alliance with Welsh is quite an interesting factor, which is what really upsets Bede. But also, so battles with Northumbria, battles with East Anglia, 640, 654, Battle of Bullcamp probably, where King Arnhem was killed, battle with the West Saxons. They're very good at smiting the enemy. And the final battle, which actually ended up with a Northumbrian victory, I say it's not final, but what brought Penda down anyway, 655, the Battle of the River Winwad, which was almost certainly the River Went, just south of Pontefract, battle zone between north and south, when Northumbria effectively took over Mercia, at least for 3 years, could have been the occasion for the burial of that. And so we're talking about King Penda there, killed 655. Mercia soon makes a comeback under Wulfhere and his brother Athelrad, and goes on to become, as many of you know, especially under Offa and his formidable queen, who even has her own coin, the overlords of England. So the context here is almost certainly 655, or perhaps shortly after. I think I'm personally leaning towards 655 as the great disaster which led to the temporary setback for Mercia. There's nothing quite like that before or since, at least in the 7th century anyway. Right, I mentioned the feasting equipment we've hardly had time to touch on. The wealth of stuff. That, for example, is the lovely little the replica of the Maplewood bottles from down here that has that extraordinary pattern that is so close to the arms of the Great Gold Cross. Baptismal spoons which add to the religious character. But it's this little concatenation of events up here. You've got the King's Own lyre there that was in a beaver skin bag that fell off its peg on the wall and landed across that big bowl there. That is a drop-handled bowl from the Eastern Mediterranean. That's really top-class feasting equipment, like the ewer jug from Brittlewell. And then above that, you can see in the picture there, the lovely little hanging bowl. That's the one with the silver patch. That's very fine bronze it's made of, but the repair was done with silver. in the Sutton workshop. It's a very odd bowl. It's got a little fish that rotates on a pedestal in the middle of the bowl. And, that's a mystery object. The fact that it might be the possibility it might be an early magnetic compass is a theory which will not go away, and we need more work on that to establish that. So that's what the whole lot looked like, all squashed together. And you can just see some of the wood that's pickled by the copper in the bronze of the musical instrument, especially squashed, and thus the top half is preserved between those two bowls. And so it all came out looking like that. One end of it was a bit shriveled, so they thought at first it was an Irish harp, but then they realized that in fact it's the Germanic round-headed type. And so this is great work by Rupert Bruce Smith, and a whole chapter on this in his Aspects of Anglo-Saxon Archaeology, and the full report in volume 3 of the big biblical reports. And young Graham Lawson, working on this at the time, compared what's left with the early 8th century manuscript images, like this lovely miniature from now the British Library, was a miniature from a psalter made at probably by the nuns of Minster on Thanet in the early 8th century, later Canterbury, which is how it ended up in British Library. And there you see an Anglo-Saxon playing a harp, and all sorts of clues there, like little strap over the left wrist. He's strumming it rather than picking it. Like, it's not an Irish harp, it's a strummable instrument, and forming chords by selecting different strings and leaving others open. And so hence the first of the great British Museum replicas made at the Dolmesh workshops, and still got the eagle patterning there, look, and still appearing in the manuscript artwork. So again, that continuity of forms from one medium to another. And for me, what really puts the final convincing evidence that these are not just sort of randomly thrown on board for some anonymous minstrel in the bilges. These are the kings themselves. Kings themselves were expected to be poets, because that was the medium in which wisdom was transmitted and maintained. And if you were a king, you had to have wisdom. We can think of many political leaders lacking wisdom these days. And so they're going to be accomplished poets, just as Alfred the Great was, of course. And you cannot have the poetry without the stringed instrument. They go together at all times. And so looking at the instrument, we know how they were tuned. I thought it was worth experimenting to see how they go together. Anyway, let's just, I think we're in tune. Yep. Shielding, fella ficende, foreign rector. Willem Hilde Deo, Harpen Wumu, Gomen Wudu Greta. Willem Yedarach, Sof and Sarich. Willem Sillichspel, Lekt, after it, Longhood Kühling. Willem Eftongan, Eldo Yabunden, Gomo Goosweger, Yeolgoth Queethan, Wilder Stringle. Heather Innerwale, Von Hay, Wintrum Floyd, Vaughan.